Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair of the human ship Meridian, watching the stars drift by outside the large windows. He was a tall man with brown hair and tired eyes. His uniform was neat, but showed signs of wear from months in space. As the head of security, Jake was responsible for keeping everyone on the ship safe. The Meridian was not a warship. It was built for exploring new worlds and making contact with alien species. But these days, even exploration ships needed weapons. The galaxy was at war, and nowhere was truly safe anymore. 3 years ago, humans had joined something called the Galactic Alliance. This was a group of 12 different alien species who worked together. They shared technology, traded goods, and helped protect each other. At least that was how it was supposed to work. The problem was the Zephyrian Empire. The Zephyrians were a race of warriors who wanted to conquer everything. They were bigger and stronger than humans, with thick skin that could stop bullets. They had better weapons and faster ships. Worst of all, they enjoyed hurting others. Jake had seen the reports from worlds that fell to the Zephyrians. Entire cities burned to the ground, families torn apart, children taken as slaves. The Alliance tried to fight back, but they were losing, badly. Most of the alien species in the Alliance thought humans were weak. The Catherians were proud warriors who looked down on human emotions. The Vorthans were cold and calculating, treating everything like a math problem. Neither group thought much of human soldiers. Jake did not blame them entirely. Humans were new to space travel. Their weapons were primitive compared to alien technology. Human ships were slower and less armored. On paper, humans looked like the weakest link in the Alliance. But Jake knew something the aliens did not understand. Humans had survived on Earth by being stubborn. When bigger, stronger predators hunted them, humans found ways to fight back. They used tools, worked together, and never gave up. These traits had helped humans spread across their entire planet. The communication system made a soft beeping sound. Lieutenant Lisa Hayes, the ship's communications officer, turned toward Jake. She was a young woman with short blonde hair and quick hands. "Sir, we're getting a distress signal," she said. "It's coming from Nexus Prime." Jake knew that name. Nexus. Prime was a border world, close to Zephyrian space. It had a small Alliance garrison and about 200,000 civilians. Most were farmers and miners who had built new lives far from the main trade routes. "What does the message say?" Jake asked. Lisa pressed some buttons on her console. The main screen showed a man in an Alliance uniform. His face was dirty, and there was smoke behind him. Explosions could be heard in the background. "This is Colonel Martin Webb of the Nexus Prime Garrison," the man said. His voice shook with fear and exhaustion. "We are under attack by a full Zephyrian fleet. They have ground forces on the planet. We cannot hold them much longer. Request immediate assistance. Repeat, we need help now." The message ended and the screen went black. Jake felt his stomach tighten. A full Zephyrian fleet meant at least 20 ships. The Meridian had only light defensive weapons. They were not built for this kind of fight. "Sir," said Commander Dan Miller, the ship's pilot. He was an older man with gray hair and steady hands. "Alliance Command is 3 days away at best. By the time they send help, Nexus Prime will be gone." Jake stood up and walked to the large window. He could see a distant star that he knew was the Nexus system. 200,000 people lived there, men, women, children who had done nothing wrong except live in the wrong place at the wrong time. The smart thing to do was report the attack to Alliance Command and continue on their mission. The Meridian was not a warship. They had 30 crew, members, and no heavy weapons. Going to Nexus Prime would probably get them all killed for nothing. But Jake thought about the fear in Colonel Webb's voice. He thought about families hiding in their homes while Zephyrian soldiers kicked down doors. He thought about children crying for parents who would never come home. "Dan, how long to reach Nexus Prime at full speed?" Jake asked. 4 hours, sir. But Jake, we can't fight a whole fleet." "We're not going to fight a fleet," Jake said. "We're going to save people." He turned to face his crew. Lisa looked worried but determined. Dan shook his head but was already plotting a course. The others watched Jake with trust in their eyes. They knew he would not ask them to do something unless he believed it was right. "Listen up, everyone," Jake said. We all joined the alliance to make a difference, to help protect innocent people from those who would hurt them. Today we get that chance." He paused and looked each crew member in the eye. "I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. We might not make it back. Anyone who wants to stay behind can take a shuttle to the nearest alliance base. No one will think less of you." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke up. They had all seen the same reports Jake had seen. They knew what the Zephyrians did to prisoners and civilians. If they could save even a few lives, it would be worth the risk. "All right then," Jake said. "Dan, take us to Nexus Prime, best possible speed." The Meridian turned toward the distant star and accelerated. Behind them, the safe route to Alliance space grew smaller. Ahead lay a world under attack, a desperate garrison and 200,000 people who needed help. Jake did not know it yet, but this decision would change everything. Not just for him, not just for his crew, but for the entire galaxy. Sometimes, the most important moments start with simple choices. Sometimes heroes are just ordinary people who decide to help when help is needed most. The Meridian raced through space toward Nexus Prime, carrying 30 humans who refused to let innocent people die without a fight. The Meridian dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Nexus system. What Jake saw made his blood run cold. 23 Zephyrian warships hung in space around the planet like hungry wolves. Their dark hulls were covered in weapon ports and armor plating. Each ship was 3 times larger than the Meridian. "My God," whispered Lisa Hayes from her communication station. "Look at the size of those things." Jake watched through the main window as the Zephyrian fleet bombarded the planet below. Bright flashes of light appeared on the surface where cities used to be. The beautiful blue and green world was slowly turning gray with smoke and dust. "Sir," said Dan Miller from the pilot's seat, "long-range sensors show at least 50 Zephyrian troop ships on the ground. They have thousands of soldiers down there." Jake felt helpless. The Meridian had light defensive weapons that might scratch the paint on a Zephyrian warship. They could not fight this fleet, but they could not just leave either. "Are there any civilian ships trying to escape?" Jake asked. Lisa checked her instruments. "Yes, sir. I'm picking up 7 evacuation ships. They're trying to reach orbit, but the Zephyrians are hunting them down." Jake watched as one of the evacuation ships broke through the atmosphere. It was an old cargo vessel, probably packed with families. The ship made it halfway to space before a Zephyrian fighter caught it. Green energy beams cut through the hull, like it was made of paper. The ship exploded in a ball of fire. "Those bastards," Dan said through clenched teeth. "They're killing civilians on purpose." Jake had read reports about Zephyrian tactics, but seeing it happen was different. These were not soldiers fighting soldiers. This was slaughter. The Zephyrians enjoyed causing fear and pain. It made them feel powerful. "Can we reach any of the other evacuation ships?" Jake asked. "Maybe," said Lisa. "There's one ship called the Golden Hope about 50 miles from the main city. It's carrying mostly children from the schools. But sir, there are Zephyrian ground forces all around that area." Jake made his decision quickly. "Dan, take us down. Stay low and use the mountains to hide us from their sensors." "Jake, this is crazy," Dan said, but his hands were already moving over the controls. "One ship against their entire army." "We're not fighting their army," Jake said. "We're saving children." The Meridian dove toward the planet's surface. Dan was an excellent pilot who flew between mountain peaks and through narrow valleys. The ship's hull scraped against rock walls more than once, but they stayed hidden from the Zephyrian fleet above. As they got closer to the surface, Jake could see the real horror of the invasion. Entire towns were burning. Roads were filled with refugees trying to escape. Zephyrian soldiers moved through the destruction like they were enjoying a game. The Golden Hope sat in a clearing near what used to be a school. The ship was old and slow, built for carrying cargo, not people. But someone had loaded it with over 300 children between the ages of 5 and 15. Teachers and parents stood guard around the ship with hunting rifles and farming tools. Zephyrian soldiers were closing in from 3 directions. There were at least 200 of them, heavily armed and wearing battle armor. The humans on the ground did not stand a chance. "Set us down between the Golden Hope and the closest group of soldiers," Jake ordered. Lisa, get on the radio and tell that ship to take off the moment we touch ground. What about us? Dan asked. We buy them time, Jake said. He stood up and walked toward the weapons locker. Everyone arm yourselves. We're going to hold those soldiers off long enough for the children to escape. The Meridian's crew had never been in real combat before. They were explorers and scientists, not warriors, but they all grabbed weapons without hesitation. They knew what would happen to those children if the Zephyrians caught them. The ship landed hard in the clearing. Jake could see Zephyrian soldiers running toward them from the forest. Each enemy soldier was 8 feet tall with thick gray skin and 4 arms. They carried energy weapons that could cut through trees. Remember, Jake told his crew as they prepared to leave the ship, we don't need to win. We just need to give those kids enough time to get away. The crew of the Meridian ran out of their ship and took positions behind rocks and fallen trees. The Golden Hope was already starting its engines, black smoke pouring from its old exhaust ports. The first Zephyrian soldier to reach the clearing was huge even by their standards. He had scars across his face and arms that marked him as a veteran warrior. He raised his weapon toward the Golden Hope, probably planning to shoot down the evacuation ship before it could take off. Jake shot him 3 times in the chest. The Zephyrian's armor absorbed most of the damage, but the impact knocked him backward. More importantly, it got his attention. The scarred Zephyrian turned toward Jake with rage in his yellow eyes. He said something in his own language that sounded like a curse. Then he and his soldiers opened fire on the human positions. Energy beams cut through the air around Jake's head. The rocks he was hiding behind started to melt from the heat. But the Meridian crew kept shooting back, forcing the Zephyrians to take cover instead of focusing on the evacuation ship. Behind them, the Golden Hope lifted off the ground. Its engines screamed with effort as the old ship fought against gravity. Jake could see children's faces pressed against the windows, watching the battle below. Come on, Jake whispered. Get out of here. More Zephyrian soldiers poured out of the forest. There were too many of them. Jake's crew was running out of ammunition. Several of his people were already wounded, but the Golden Hope was gaining altitude. It was slow and clumsy, but it was moving away from the danger. The ship reached the tree line, then climbed higher toward the safety of space. A Zephyrian fighter appeared in the sky above them. Jake's heart sank as he realized the evacuation ship would never outrun a military craft. The fighter moved into attack position, its weapons charging with deadly energy. Then something unexpected happened. The fighter exploded in midair. Jake looked up to see 3 Alliance military ships diving out of the clouds. They were small patrol craft, probably from the garrison that was supposed to be overwhelmed. "This is Colonel Webb," came a voice over Jake's radio. "Sorry, we're late to the party. Looks like you could use some help." The Alliance ships engaged the Zephyrian fighters while the Golden Hope escaped into space. Jake and his crew used the distraction to fall back to their own ship. They had saved over 300 children, but the cost was high. 5 members of the Meridian crew were wounded, and their ship had taken heavy damage. As they lifted off, Jake looked back at the burning planet below. They had won this small battle, but the war was far from over. The Zephyrians would continue destroying worlds, killing innocents and spreading fear across the galaxy. But something had changed inside Jake during the fight. He had seen evil with his own eyes and refused to back down. He had watched ordinary people become heroes when children needed saving. Most importantly, he had learned that sometimes the only way to stop monsters was to fight them on their own terms. The Meridian limped away from Nexus Prime carrying 30 humans who had looked into the face of darkness and refused to blink. They did not know it yet, but this day would be remembered as the beginning of something new. The day humans stopped being the weak link in the Alliance and started becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. 3 weeks after the battle at Nexus Prime, Jake Morrison stood in the meeting room at Harmony Base, the main Alliance headquarters. The room was filled with alien officers from 12 different species. At the head of the table sat High Commander Zeth Kar, a tall Catherian with blue skin and silver armor. Jake had requested this meeting to propose a new strategy. He wanted permission to form a special human unit that could strike deep behind enemy lines. but as he looked around the room, he could see doubt and dismissal in the alien's eyes. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," said High Commander Zethkar in his deep voice, "your actions at Nexus Prime were brave but foolish. You risked an entire ship to save a few hundred civilians." "Those civilians were children, sir," Jake replied, "and we saved over 300 lives." A Vorthan general named Kexmore spoke up. His species looked like tall, thin humans with gray skin and large black eyes. "The mathematics are clear. You endangered 30 trained personnel to save untrained civilians. The military value of your crew exceeds the value of those children." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "With respect, General, those children will grow up to be the next generation of the Alliance. They're worth protecting." "Emotion," said another Kitherian officer with disgust. "This is why humans are not suited for real war. You make decisions with your hearts instead of your minds." Jake had heard this argument many times over the past 3 weeks. The Alliance military leaders believed in careful planning and overwhelming force. They wanted to build up their fleets, fortify their borders, and wait for the perfect moment to strike back. But while they planned and debated, more worlds fell to the Zephyrians. Jake had read the reports. 5 systems in the past month, millions of people dead or enslaved. The Alliance was losing this war because they were fighting like civilized beings against an enemy that had no such limits. "I have a proposal," Jake said, activating a holographic display. "Let me form a small strike team of human volunteers. We'll hit Zephyrian supply lines, command posts, and communication centers. Quick strikes that cause maximum damage with minimum risk to Alliance forces." High Commander Zethkar leaned back in his chair. "And what makes you think such tactics would succeed where our main fleets have failed?" Jake had spent weeks preparing for this question. He had studied every battle report, every intelligence briefing, every piece of information about Zephyrian military structure. What he found surprised him. "The Zephyrians are strong, but they have weaknesses," Jake said. "Their entire military is based on a chain of command that goes straight to the top. Every order comes from Supreme Overlord Vraktar himself. If we can disrupt that chain, we can cause confusion throughout their forces." A Kitherian general laughed. "You think your small human team can challenge the Supreme Overlord? He has killed thousands of warriors in single combat. His personal guard are the most feared soldiers in the galaxy. I'm not talking about challenging him directly," Jake said. "But if we make enough trouble, if we hit enough targets, he'll have to respond. And when he does, we might find an opportunity." The room fell silent. Jake could see the alien officers exchanging glances. They thought he was crazy. Maybe they were right, but Jake had seen what happened when the Alliance tried to fight a conventional war against an unconventional enemy. "Request denied," said High Commander Zethkar finally. "We cannot authorize such reckless action. Your proposal is based on hope rather than strategy." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had expected this answer, but it still hurt. The Alliance would continue its careful, civilized approach to war while innocent people died. "Sir," Jake said carefully, "what are my orders then?" "Return to your ship and continue patrol duties," the High Commander replied. "Leave warfare to those who understand it." Jake saluted and left the meeting room. But as he walked through the corridors of Harmony Base, his mind was already working on a different plan. If the Alliance would not authorize what needed to be done, then he would do it without authorization. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake quietly reached out to other humans in the Alliance military. He was not the only one frustrated with the current strategy. Many human soldiers had witnessed Zephyrian brutality firsthand and wanted to fight back more aggressively. Captain Dan Miller was the first to volunteer. He had been Jake's pilot during the Nexus Prime rescue and had seen the burning cities below. "I'm tired of running away from fights we should be winning," Dan said. Staff Sergeant Rachel Stone joined next. She was a sniper whose entire unit had been killed in a Zephyrian ambush. 3 months earlier, Rachel was quiet and professional, but Jake could see the cold anger in her eyes whenever the enemy was mentioned. Chief Petty Officer Alex Chen signed up after learning his family had died on Nexus Prime. The communications specialist had tried to send them a warning before the attack, but the message arrived too late. Alex blamed himself for their deaths and wanted revenge. Dr. Helen Carter was not a soldier, but she was brilliant. The human scientist had been studying Zephyrian culture and psychology for years. She agreed to help plan their missions in exchange for the chance to test her theories about enemy behavior. Corporal Lisa Hayes from Jake's own crew volunteered without hesitation. The young woman had proven herself capable under fire during the rescue mission. More importantly, she understood demolitions and could help them cause maximum damage to enemy targets. Sergeant Kevin Torres, a combat medic, completed their core team. Kevin had treated wounded refugees from 6 different Zephyrian attacks. He had seen children with burns from energy weapons and adults broken by torture. The gentleman who used to joke and laugh had become grim and determined. Jake met with his team in secret aboard a cargo ship in the outer system. They called themselves the Wraith Squadron because they planned to strike like ghosts and disappear before the enemy could respond. "Listen carefully," Jake told them. "What we're about to do goes against direct orders from Alliance Command. If we're caught, we'll face court-martial at best. But I believe this is the only way to hurt the enemy enough to make a difference." Dr. Carter activated a holographic map showing Zephyrian supply routes and command centers. "I've identified 17 targets that are lightly defended but strategically important," she said. "If we hit them in the right order, we can disrupt their entire logistics network in this sector." Rachel Stone studied the map with professional interest. "Most of these facilities have civilian workers alongside military personnel. Are we talking about killing non-combatants?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Jake had wrestled with this moral problem for weeks. The Alliance rules of engagement prohibited attacks on civilian targets, but Zephyrian civilians were often willing participants in the war machine that enslaved entire worlds. "We target military objectives only," Jake said finally. "But if civilians get in the way, that's not our problem. The Zephyrians made the rules of this war when they started murdering children." Kevin Torres nodded grimly. "I've seen what they do to prisoners. They don't deserve mercy." Alex Chen was checking communication frequencies on his equipment. "I can jam their distress calls and confuse their response times, make it harder for them to coordinate defense." Lisa Hayes was already sketching out demolition plans. "Give me access to their power systems and I can make sure they stay down for weeks." Jake looked around at his team. These were good people who had been pushed too far by an enemy that showed no restraint. They were about to cross lines that could never be uncrossed, but Jake believed it was necessary. "Our first target is a supply depot on the moon of Kepler 7, Jake said. "It's defended by a small garrison and supplies 3 Zephyrian battle groups. Dr. Carter believes hitting it will force them to reroute supplies through a more vulnerable facility." The team spent the rest of the night planning their attack. They studied guard rotations, facility layouts, and escape routes. By dawn, they had a complete mission plan that would either make them heroes or war criminals. Jake knew there was no going back after this. Once they struck their first target, the Wraith Squadron would be committed to a war that the Alliance was too civilized to fight. But as he thought about the children they had saved at Nexus Prime and the worlds that had burned while politicians debated, Jake felt certain they were making the right choice. Sometimes, he realized, good people had to do terrible things to stop even worse things from happening. Jake Morrison crouched behind a rocky outcrop on the mining world of Kepler 442b, watching the Zephyrian dreadnought Bloodfang settle into orbit above the planet. The massive warship was 3 miles long and bristling with weapons. Its arrival meant that Supreme Overlord Vraktar had taken the bait. For 6 months, the Wraith Squadron had been hitting Zephyrian targets across the sector: supply depots, communication centers, command posts, fuel refineries. Each strike was carefully planned and brutally executed. They had destroyed millions of credits worth of enemy equipment and killed hundreds of soldiers. But the cost had been terrible. Jake's team had started with 7 members. Now only he remained alive. Lisa Hayes had died 3 weeks ago during a raid on an ammunition facility. Her explosives had worked perfectly, destroying the entire complex. But a piece of shrapnel had found the gap in her armor. She had smiled at Jake as she bled out, proud that her final bomb had taken out a full regiment's worth of supplies. Rachel Stone had fallen defending a refugee convoy from Zephyrian fighters. The sniper had stayed behind to cover the evacuation, her rifle picking off enemy pilots until a missile strike ended her war. They found her body still clutching her weapon, surrounded by empty shell casings. Kevin Torres had been captured during their attack on a medical facility where the Zephyrians were experimenting on Alliance prisoners. The medic had insisted on staying to free the captives even when Jake ordered a retreat. Security cameras later showed Kevin fighting to his last breath, trying to protect people he had never met. Alex Chen had volunteered for a suicide mission to destroy a major communication hub. His technical skills were the only way to break through their security systems. The explosion had blinded Zephyrian forces across 2 star systems, but Alex never made it to the extraction point. Dan Miller had been shot down during their escape from a fuel depot raid. His final radio transmission was calm and professional, reporting that he had damaged his engines and could not keep up. He had ordered Jake to leave him behind and complete the mission. Dr. Helen Carter had been the hardest loss to accept. The scientist had been working on a psychological analysis of Supreme Overlord Vraktar when Zephyrian assassins found their safe house. She had transmitted her final research to Jake with her dying breath, giving him the information he needed for this last mission. Now Jake was alone on a dead world, waiting for the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy to come and kill him. The mining facility around him was rigged with enough explosives to level a small city. Every tunnel, every room, every piece of equipment had been turned into a weapon. The plan was simple in its desperation. Jake had leaked false intelligence suggesting that a major Alliance weapons cache was hidden on Kepler 442b. The information was designed to reach Vraktar personally, appealing to the Supreme Overlord's ego and his need to crush any threat to his authority. Jake's communicator crackled to life. "Human warrior," came a deep, growling voice. "I am Supreme Overlord Vraktar. You have caused much trouble for my empire. I have come to end your pathetic existence personally." Through his binoculars, Jake could see dropships launching from the Blood Fang. Hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers were coming to the surface, along with their leader. Jake keyed his radio one, last time. "My name is Jake Morrison," he said. "I'm here to collect a debt your people owe to every innocent person you've murdered." The first wave of Zephyrian troops landed near the main entrance to the mining complex. They moved with military precision, their energy weapons sweeping the area for targets. Jake let them advance deep into the facility before triggering Lisa's first surprise. The explosion collapsed 3 levels of tunnels, trapping dozens of soldiers underground. But more kept coming. Jake moved through the facility using maintenance shafts and emergency passages that only he knew about. He picked off stragglers with his rifle, then disappeared before they could locate him. Rachel's sniper nest in the control tower gave him a perfect view of the landing zone. Jake used her weapon to target the officers, causing confusion in the enemy ranks. Every shot was carefully placed, just like she had taught him during their months of fighting together. The Zephyrians adapted quickly, sending small teams through multiple entrances. Jake fell back to the deeper levels, using Kevin's medical knowledge to place his shots for maximum psychological effect. Wounded enemies screamed in pain, demoralizing their comrades. Alex's communication jamming equipment prevented the Zephyrians from coordinating their search. Their radio channels filled with static and false signals, making it impossible to share information about Jake's location. But slowly, inevitably, they cornered him. Jake found himself in the main processing chamber, at the heart of the facility, surrounded by massive mining equipment. His ammunition was nearly gone, his armor was cracked, and he was bleeding from a dozen wounds. That was when Supreme Overlord Vraktar entered the chamber. The Zephyrian leader was even more terrifying in person than in the intelligence reports. He stood 8.5 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms and natural armor plating that covered his entire body. His eyes glowed yellow in the dim light, and his teeth were sharp enough to tear through steel. "So," Vraktar said in perfect English, "you are the ghost that has been haunting my empire. You are smaller than I expected. Jake stepped out from behind a mining laser, his rifle aimed at the Supreme Overlord's center mass. Size isn't everything. Your people should have learned that by now. Fraktar laughed, a sound like grinding metal. My people have conquered half the galaxy. What have your people accomplished except running and hiding? We saved 300 children at Nexus Prime, Jake said. We freed 2,000 prisoners from your labor camps. We destroyed enough of your supplies to delay your advance by 6 months. And what did it cost you? Fraktar asked, genuinely curious. Your entire team is dead. You're alone, wounded, and trapped. Was it worth it? Jake thought about Lisa's smile as she died, Rachel's determination to protect innocence, Kevin's refusal to abandon prisoners, Alex's sacrifice for the greater good, Dan's calm professionalism in the face of death, Dr. Carter's final gift of knowledge. Yes, Jake said simply. It was worth it. The battle that followed was not the honorable duel that stories were made of. Jake used every dirty trick, every environmental hazard, every psychological manipulation at his disposal. He targeted the joints in Fraktar's armor with armor-piercing rounds. He used the mining equipment as weapons, trying to crush or burn his opponent. Fraktar was faster and stronger than any human had a right to survive against. His energy weapons could cut through starship hulls. His forearms gave him advantages that Jake could not match. But Jake had something the Supreme Overlord did not understand. Jake had learned to fight like prey that refused to die. He used the facility's layout against his enemy, leading Fraktar through areas where the mining equipment created hazards. He exploited the Supreme Overlord's arrogance, making him overconfident and careless. The duel ranged through multiple levels of the complex. Jake was thrown through walls burned by energy weapons and crushed against machinery. But every time Fraktar thought he had won, Jake got back up. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulder, probable concussion, none of it mattered. In the end, Jake's victory came not from superior skill or strength, but from pure human stubbornness. When any reasonable being would have surrendered, Jake kept fighting. When logic said he should die, Jake refused to accept that logic. The final blow came when Jake lured Fraktar into the main power chamber. The Supreme Overlord, confident in his victory, did not notice the improvised explosive device that Dr. Carter had taught Jake to build. The explosion brought down tons of machinery on both of them. Jake crawled out of the wreckage hours later, his body broken but alive. Next to him lay the body of Supreme Overlord Fraktar, crushed beneath the mining equipment he had been too proud to fear. With shaking hands, Jake drew his combat knife and completed the final task. He severed the Supreme Overlord's head, the trophy that would prove to the galaxy that even the most feared warrior could be defeated. As Jake limped toward the surface, carrying his grim prize, he thought about the message he would deliver to the Alliance Council. The war was not over, but something fundamental had changed. Humanity had shown that even apex predators could be hunted by prey animals determined enough to accept the cost of victory. Jake Morrison stood outside the Great Council chamber on Sigma Station, holding a sealed metal container in his left hand. His right arm hung useless at his side, broken during his fight with Supreme Overlord Fraktar. His face was covered in scars and his once neat uniform was torn and bloodstained. Through the chamber doors he could hear the voices of Alliance leaders debating surrender terms. After 6 months of defeats, many species wanted to negotiate with the Zephyrian Empire. They spoke of acceptable losses and strategic withdrawals. They had given up hope of winning. Jake pushed open the heavy doors and walked into the chamber. The room fell silent as over 200 alien representatives turned to stare at him. High Commander Zethkar sat at the head of the council table, his blue skin pale with shock. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the Catherian leader said slowly, "You are supposed to be dead. Your ship was reported destroyed 3 weeks ago." Jake walked down the center aisle without answering. His boots echoed in the silent chamber. Alien eyes followed his every step, taking in his battered appearance and grim expression. Some representatives whispered to each other in their native languages. When Jake reached the council table, he set down the metal container with a heavy thud. The sound seemed unusually loud in the quiet room. "I have a message for the council," Jake said. His voice was hoarse from shouting during battle, but it carried clearly through the chamber. General Kexmore, the tall Vorthan strategist, leaned forward. "You are out of uniform and covered in blood. What is the meaning of this interruption?" Jake opened the metal container. Inside, preserved in clear fluid, was the severed head of Supreme Overlord Vraktar. The Zephyrian leader's yellow eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his fanged mouth frozen in a final snarl. Gasps and shouts erupted throughout the chamber. Several alien representatives fell out of their chairs. A Catherian general drew his weapon before remembering where he was. The Vorthan delegation huddled together, their large black eyes wide with shock. "This is Supreme Overlord Vraktar," Jake said calmly. He was the absolute ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. He commanded their entire military. He was supposed to be invincible. High Commander Zethkar stared at the severed head for a long moment. "This is impossible. No one has ever defeated Vraktar in single combat. He has killed thousands of warriors." "He killed my team," Jake said. "Lisa Hayes, Rachel Stone, Kevin Torres, Alex Chen, Dan Miller, Dr. Helen Carter, all dead because they believed in protecting innocent people from monsters." Jake pulled a datapad from his pocket and activated it. The holographic display showed intelligence reports from across Zephyrian space. Vraktar's death has already begun the collapse of their empire. Local commanders are fighting each other for control. Slave worlds are rising in rebellion. Their war machine is tearing itself apart. A Catherian admiral stood up. "Even if this is real, you have violated every law of warfare. You operated without authorization. You killed civilians. You committed acts of terrorism." "I did what was necessary," Jake replied. "While you debated strategy and worried about your precious rules, entire worlds burned. Children died in their sleep. Families were torn apart." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Some delegates demanded Jake's immediate arrest. Others wanted to know how he had accomplished the impossible. The noise grew louder until High Commander Zethkar called for order. "Explain yourself, Morrison," the High Commander said. "How did one human succeed where our combined fleets failed?" Jake looked around the room at the alien faces. Some showed fear, others disgust. A few showed something that might have been respect. "You want to know the secret? It's simple. We stopped fighting like civilized beings." He gestured toward the severed head. "Vraktar thought he was hunting prey. The Zephyrians always saw humans as weak because we show emotion, because we care about casualties, because we follow rules. They were right about one thing. We are prey animals." Jake's voice grew harder. "But they forgot something important. About prey animals. The ones that survive long enough eventually learn to hunt. And when prey becomes predator, they fight with everything they have because they remember what it feels like to be helpless." General Kexmore spoke up. "You are describing barbarism. The Alliance was founded on principles of civilization and cooperation." "Your principles are a luxury," Jake said. "A luxury bought with the blood of people who are willing to get their hands dirty so you can keep yours clean." A young Catherian officer near the back of the room stood up. "What you did was murder. How is that different from what the Zephyrians do?" Jake turned to face him. "The difference is choice. The Zephyrians chose to start this war. They chose to target civilians. They chose to make cruelty their weapon. I just chose to finish what they started." He walked back to the council table and closed the metal container. "You can put me on trial if it makes you feel better about yourselves. You can call me a war criminal and pretend that your hands are clean. But remember this when the next enemy comes for your worlds." Jake's voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "When darkness comes for your children, when your families cry out in terror, it will be monsters like me who answer that call. Because sometimes the only way to protect what is good is to become what is necessary." High Commander Zethkar stood up slowly. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, you are under arrest for violation of Alliance military law. You will be confined, pending trial." "I understand, sir," Jake said. He did not resist as security officers placed restraints on his wrists. "But before you decide my fate, Check those intelligence reports. See how many worlds are free today because of what my team did. As they led Jake from the chamber, alien representatives began arguing among themselves. Some demanded his execution as an example. Others pointed out that his actions had effectively ended the war. The debate would continue for months. But Jake had delivered his message. He had shown the galaxy that humanity would not be victims anymore. He had proven that even the most feared predators could be brought down by prey animals determined enough to pay the price. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood in a military courtroom as the judges read their verdict. He was found guilty of disobeying orders, conducting unauthorized military operations and violating the laws of war. But he was also credited with saving millions of lives and ending a conflict that had threatened the entire galaxy. His sentence was time served and reduction in rank. The Alliance could not execute the man who had won their war for them, no matter how uncomfortable his methods made them feel. Jake accepted the verdict without emotion. He had known from the beginning that there would be a price for victory. He had watched his friends die one by one, and he had sacrificed pieces of his own soul with every choice he made. After the trial, Jake visited the memorial wall where the names of war dead were inscribed in stone. He found the section for his team and placed his hand against the cold metal. Lisa Hayes, Rachel Stone, Kevin Torres, Alex Chen, Dan Miller, Helen Carter. Heroes who had given everything to protect innocence. We did it, he whispered to their names, and the children are safe. Jake Morrison walked away from the memorial and into an uncertain future. The galaxy was at peace, but he knew that peace was temporary. There would be other wars, other enemies, other times when civilization would need people willing to cross lines that should not be crossed. He had become exactly what he set out to destroy, and he would have to live with that knowledge for the rest of his days. But as he thought about the children on the Golden Hope, about the slaves freed from Zephyrian labor camps, about the worlds that would never burn, Jake knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes the greatest tragedy of war is not who dies, but who survives and what they must become to ensure that survival has meaning. Jake Morrison had become humanity's answer to darkness, and he would carry that burden until the day he died.